Hello and welcome to the Jerroms Group Autumn 2024 Budget Roundup. This is the first Labour budget we've had. There's quite a lot to digest, although perhaps it wasn't quite as painful in some areas as some of us were expecting. So we're going to jump right straight in. I'm going to jump into income tax to start with and talk to our private client director, Kate. Before I do, just remember we've got comments available, so please throw comments in there and we'll try and pick them up as we go through. Income tax then, Kate.
Yeah, so
not that exciting really, was it? But we weren't expecting much either.
We weren't expecting much. I mean, she talks about how she's not going to target individuals. She's not going to put income tax up. What she has done is confirmed that the rates are still frozen, which in effect is very similar to putting the rates up, because you think, look how much wages have gone up and cost of living has gone up. People are having to earn more to live. So technically, 4 years of the same thresholds, I think, isn't great. However, nothing too surprising in there. So income tax is fairly as expected.
Yeah, so it's kind of their manifesto was we're not going to increase income tax rates, whereas actually freezing it for 4 years.
Yeah.
Fiscal drag basically means you're going to be worse off.
It's not quite the same as not increasing them, but yeah.
But they've still, as she said a few times in her speech, met their manifesto pledge to not increase. So that's a very quick point on income tax, which makes a change, I think.
Yeah.
National insurance isn't so quick, so let's dive into that one.
Okay, so national insurance, again, they've left employees alone, which was always in their manifesto. They weren't going to target employees. What they have done is affected a lot of businesses, I would say. I'm not sure that they've perhaps appreciated the gravity of what they've done with national insurance. So employers' NIC has gone from 13.8% up to 15%, which doesn't seem that horrendous. Still a 1.2% salary cost for any employer. But the other thing they've done that I wasn't expecting, certainly, was the secondary threshold, which is the rate at which they have to pay the employer's national insurance. That has gone from 9,100 to 5,000, which is really significant, actually, where you've got part-time workers and things like that. You know, some of them will fall into that lower threshold potentially. So it brings a hell of a lot more people in, and it also increases the cost of every employee you've got. The employment allowance, which HMRC introduced some years ago, they were basically targeting small businesses and saying your first 5,000 of employers' NI, you don't have to pay. They've increased that from 5,000 to 10,500, which is generous for smaller businesses. However, if the additional cost to you is more than that of the increases, then it doesn't really help. Previously, if your national insurance bill was more than 100,000, you weren't eligible for that. They've removed that cap, which is good, because I think otherwise you would have found anyone with national insurance of more than 100,000, it would have just been a massive overhead straight on the business. So at least you are going to get the benefit potentially of that 10,500. Still not great. I don't think any business will welcome changes.
I think for those bigger firms, it's a nice to have, isn't it? I think I got Matt to do some very quick in about the 2 hours we've had since the budget.
I did consider it about 5 minutes ago, and then I thought I'm not going to be able to do it in time.
So his very quick calculations were, if got an employee on 25,000, it was going to cost something like another £600. 50 and 100,000 was somewhere in the 1,100-1,200. So that's quite, if you've got a lot of employees, that's big.
And you think for big corporations, perhaps, you know, hugely profitable corporations, it's not that big of an impact. They can absorb it. For smaller businesses, what it will mean, unfortunately, is if your profits are already on a bit of a knife edge, let's say you're just about breaking even, or you're just about able to take home a decent wage yourself, what it is going to mean is no pay rises. Because ultimately you're going to look at your profit and loss and say, what is the cost of each employee? And it's going to prevent people from getting raises where that extra cost comes in. So I
mean, that's the problem, though, isn't it? So yes, it's only a tax on the employers. Which, you know, we're a firm of accountants. Most of our clients are employers, so it affects most of our clients. But also, how is it actually going to impact employees? Are we not just? Is it not going to indirectly impact them anyway? Plus, are people going to employ? Is it going to reduce the ability to employ? So you've got two big downsides.
I mean, I know certainly for us and for our clients, when we look at a package, we look at the overall cost of that package. So we factor everything in: national insurance, pensions, corporation tax relief. So all of them rates do have an impact on what that employee is actually costing you. So I do think it'll have an impact. And like I say, bigger businesses, maybe not, in which case you think, well, maybe it's fair enough. Yeah. But smaller businesses, I do think it has quite a significant impact, actually.
Just one point on that. I don't think the employment allowance also applies to solo director firms. And so now there's going to be that trade-off between NI and corporation tax, where they're trying to keep their income at the level to achieve the NI accrual as well. That's another.
Because again, that's another big impact for the calculations we do. When you look at salary versus dividend rules, you normally end up somewhere around the secondary threshold, and then the rest is dividends. Now that secondary threshold is so much lower. I'm not actually sure where the state benefits kick in. We'll have to check that as to whether actually you're going to end up.
Yeah, they haven't really said a lot on that. I presume that'll be in the detail. And I know we're going to talk about that further on, but obviously with the minimum wage increase as well, if you run a business that has got a lot of younger staff, so I've got friends who run restaurants and things like that, where waiters, waitresses, bar staff, they're all fairly young. I think you've got the minimum wage increase, then you've got the national insurance increase on top. It could be quite painful depending on what business you're in, I think.
Yeah, I think it was a terrible budget, to be fair, for small business owners. Couldn't have gone any worse, really.
And the fact that she doesn't consider small business owners to be the working people is a real concern. And I think we've always had that. It's so disjointed because, I know people that run small businesses and really they just take home a reasonable wage. The only reason they run a small business is because they've got that bit of flexibility working for themselves, or it's not because they're making huge amounts of profit. So you think actually it's exactly the same as hitting an employee on the same sort of salary package. So it is a little bit disjointed.
So national insurance, a little bit of a hit.
I think there's a potentially on the employer's national insurance, potentially kind of a inflationary impact as well. I guess perhaps more for the larger businesses to say, well, we want to keep our employees remunerated at sort of the same level that they are, keep them motivated, etc. But you know how we're going to do that? We're going to pass on price increases to the general public customer, whoever that may be. So there may be an unintended inflationary impact from this measure.
Okay, so let's move on from national insurance. So that is, I think, we can all agree, one of the biggest changes we've seen from this budget. Still on, I guess, a similar topic, business taxes and effects on businesses. I had this as a corporation tax topic to begin with, and then I expanded it because nothing happened. The main headlines from corporation tax: AIA, full expensing. So your plant and machinery capital allowances are unchanged. Research and development reliefs maintained as well. So she did announce before she got into the tax stuff about investments in research and development. So clearly that's in line with that as well. Electric car owners, no changes. Or extended by another year for the first year allowance. So full relief for electric cars if you provide that to employees. So some useful retention of things, but no real changes for corporation tax. We've already kind of touched on minimum wage, national living wage. And obviously that could be a big hit to certain employers. And the other thing, EIS, if anyone needs investment, EIS, SEIS funding where the investor can get relief, have all been maintained as well. So
it's quite boring on the business side.
Not much to actually say, but in a sense, some of those are beneficial.
In some ways, boring can be good. So I think, I guess, putting away, the minimum wage increases and the employer national insurance increases actually is a fairly, I guess, from a corporation tax point of view, it's actually a pretty good budget for businesses, because I guess it gives them stability from what they've had at the moment. It allows them to continue planning in the way that they have been and have done without, chopping and changing too much. So I guess from a business, kind of from a business perspective, it's not too bad, or probably positive from that aspect. So.
And I think we saw that the FTSE 250 after the budget was at 1.5%. So that's your larger national companies as such, but it's the smaller, obviously, companies. It's obviously hampered quite a bit.
Yeah. Just a question from Deborah. Double cab pickups now being treated as cars. I don't think that's changed. I think that was announced a while ago, wasn't it? About
it was, but then
changes.
they reverted. Didn't they do a U-turn on it? They said.
Oh, they
that
U-turned and U-turned, didn't
Yeah, they said they were going to treat them as cars. Then they U-turned. Then they U-turned again.
Yeah.
Well, I'll need to double check just to make sure where we are with it. But they've changed their policy on double cab pickups a few times, and actually the concept of what classes as a van anywhere is quite specific on payload and seats.
Yeah.
I mean, someone was telling me that there's a company somewhere where they will, you can pay them a certain amount of money and they will just strip out your car completely and then put it back in 6 months later, which fascinates me.
No.
But it was to get around that legislation. So it is quite specific.
Yeah.
It's quite technical. If you pass on the details, I can get back to you on that.
I think double cab pickups have always been specific. So I think if you look at the Ford range, there is one Ford out of the whole range that is classed as a car, regardless of these rules, and it has always been because of those payload rules. So you've got to be quite careful anyway. Okay, so that's business taxes. As we say, we weren't really expecting many changes because corporation tax, they said they wouldn't touch, but I think we can say things like R&D not been attacked anymore. I guess they're already attacking it from the HMRC investigations perspective. So I think some of those points were fairly welcome, I think, for especially some of these smaller businesses where the AIA and the first year allowance is utilised in full. So that's good. Daphne, should we talk VAT for a minute?
Well, we were.
Only a minute, because there's not much to say.
I was going to say, there is very little on VAT. There were a number of predictions that potentially some of the VAT savings could have been reversed out for various zero rating that could be reduced. However, that hasn't happened. Obviously, the more controversial issue is VAT chargeable on education for private schools. This isn't a surprise. We were expecting this, but the changes are coming into effect from 1 January 2025. But in fact, HMRC have set out some guidance on the changes, and it may well be that schools have to VAT register from 1 December. And given that it's 1 November tomorrow, that gives a pretty short window for those schools that potentially want to VAT register before then. There are VAT savings to be made if schools VAT register months before the date that they actually have to be able to recover VAT on expenditure. So there is up to £50,000 VAT that you could get as a school by looking to register early, but you've literally got a month from tomorrow to make that decision.
Excuse me having a coughing fit halfway through there. Yeah, so I think schools, we've done podcasts previously. We've gone into quite a lot of detail on those. One of the big things I saw someone make a post about is the idea that actually they're bringing VAT in, just to spend another minute on that. They're bringing VAT on in these private schools, but actually, do they seem to have forgotten that you can go back with this, you can go back and reclaim, is it up to 10 years, isn't it?
When we look at the Institute of Fiscal Studies report, where it's looking at making 1.6 billion a year, we're not completely sure that sort of money is going to be made.
Yeah.
So trying to bring the rules in so early, it's causing a great deal of disruption for schools, which obviously aren't large businesses. They are very much small businesses, and they have to embrace the VAT and get it together really quickly.
Interesting. You said, obviously, we had some other predictions. One of them was a lot of people thought the threshold might go down. So we have 85 now or 89 that you've got to register.
90
for VAT.
now.
90.
I think it was interesting because there were a lot of predictions about the budget. And obviously, VAT is an easy way to make a huge amount of money. There's, any VAT change would have helped the Chancellor, cover this black hole. So there was an expectation that there may be something in VAT. However, most VAT changes would affect the working people. I think that a lot of the reliefs where there are current VAT reliefs tend to be on houses, children's clothing, books, etc., and that would be controversial. In terms of the smaller businesses, throughout Europe, there are very low thresholds for VAT registration, and in some countries, you have to VAT register the day you start.
Yep.
So you don't get this first 90,000 to earn without having to register. However, bringing in a much lower VAT registration threshold isn't going to make the kind of monies that the government would hope to achieve from that, not least the administration would be huge, a huge cost.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that they haven't actually introduced that is that there's not a great deal of money that can be made.
Okay. Yeah, because I did see a statistic that a lot of people are kind of staying, when they're at that kind of level, they stay below, or they have to get quite a lot higher to compensate. So we've got this weird thing where there's a huge number in the sort of 80 to 90,000 turnover bracket for the really small businesses. So I guess they'll be, excuse me, breathing a sigh of relief.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, so VAT, that's all there is to say. We've still got our normal 5%, 20%, and no major changes there. And as you say, school fees we were always expecting. So that's that. So let's come on to, I think, probably one of the most fundamental changes, and something that has all throughout my career. These have been the rules. So this is a big change and hasn't changed for a long time.
Yeah.
Inheritance tax.
Yeah. So we already knew that the threshold of 325,000 was frozen. That is frozen until 2030 now. It was previously 2028. We've got another 2 years of that. My feelings on that are quite mixed. I'm glad it hasn't gone down.
Yes.
I've said before, when I first started in tax, if you had an estate of worth 325,000, you were in a really fortunate position. I don't think that's the case now. And they've got this statistic about how only 8% of the population pay inheritance tax. And maybe it's the sector I work in, but I find it really hard to believe that is true, because most people that I speak to have got some sort of inheritance tax exposure. So I am surprised by that, but I'll trust their statistic, I suppose.
I wouldn't be so quick to trust that.
Well, no, maybe not. So that's been extended till 2030. So no changes to that. Pensions have always been free from IHT. So whenever I speak to clients about IHT planning or where they're going to spend their funds from, how they're going to enjoy their retirement, I always say, if you can not draw down your pension, don't draw down your pension, just spend your savings. And then you've got the best of both worlds. That is going to change. So pensions from April 2027 will be within your estate for inheritance tax purposes, which I would imagine is quite a massive blow for anyone that is of that age where actually they're thinking that they could die soon before they get a chance to spend it without being too morbid. So that's a big one. Pensions are back into your estate. Another big one is business property relief and agricultural property relief. So both of these are reliefs where if you leave a certain asset that qualifies, so normally a trading business or a farm, if you leave that in your will, then you get this relief that means it doesn't have inheritance tax. It's 100% exempt. So what they're going to do now is they're saying up to 1 million of assets, you can have the relief, but over 1 million, they're going to cap it to 50%. She somehow dressed it up as she's going to let you have 50% on this over 1 million, whereas in reality, what she's actually doing is reducing it from 100% to 50%. So it's not quite as she worded it. I did appreciate her clever wording of things. But so I think that is quite a big deal, because quite often when we speak to clients, if they've got a trading business, they're quite reluctant to do any tax planning with that, because they think, well, it qualifies for inheritance tax relief. So actually, if you've got a business or a farm that's worth more than £1 million, it's going to end up being a piece of tax planning where you start looking at what can you move out of your estate, especially if you've got your pensions in there as well, bumping up what's been used if you know right band. So it's a bit of a double whammy. The AIM investments, we've always talked about this. I know me and Jamie have spoke about it before. Business relief applies to AIM investments. So after 2 years, I think it is, of holding them, they're free of inheritance tax. a lot of my clients certainly invest in them purely for that reason. They're a little bit riskier than your normal investment. They don't have great returns, but they do mean that you're outside inheritance tax. They're reducing that to 50% as well. And we've talked before about it potentially being abolished. And we've always said, it would crash the AIM market, really.
Yeah.
I do think that the same impact could be seen from a 50% drop. I don't know what your thoughts are, Jamie, but I would imagine it would impact it quite a bit.
Well, I checked the market as soon as I got back to my desk, and they were actually up 4% because they must have thought that it was being removed in full.
Oh, okay.
So it's probably generated more of a return than the AIM market has in the
Briefly.
last 5 or 6 years. But
do you reckon there was a price market, baked in decrease?
Oh,
already?
definitely, definitely. Well, prices reflect all available information. So but yeah, it's the same with non-listed BPR stocks as well, which we've seen. So where we've, as people always say, the devil is in the detail, but we don't know whether this applies to people that already hold the shares or whether it will be from a certain date.
Yeah.
But our understanding is that relief, as you say, has been halved, which was a very valuable relief. It's still considered an asset inside of your estate for the purposes of any tapering calculations, but it was 100% exempt. So
I think it definitely kind of will increase the importance of succession and exit planning in businesses. Obviously, I guess one thing we try to get across to clients is the importance, I guess, of, in our world anyway, exit planning, succession planning. But certainly, if your business is going to be worth more than £1 million, then you are going to want to either have some exit event, or you're going to have some thought. If you've got family members running the business and you want to pass it on to them, it's not going to go to them free of tax anymore. You're going to have to think about how you can get some money in their pockets to be able to fund this. And there may be some insurance types products that help to fund this sort of thing, or we may have to do some planning in terms of selling some shares in advance or passing it down early. So
no, I think I think this is another one where they are massively attacking business owners. We've just finished, because we wanted to do it pre-budget for obvious reasons, an MBO type structure, because we had a client who, it wasn't actually a trading business, but they were having to pay IHT on a property portfolio worth about 12 million because it was all in a company that they'd inherited, 40% there, plus they had no cash to pay 40% on the 12 million. So they had to somehow fund it, and we did the planning to get it out of capital rates. But that's 40% plus, luckily, 20% CGT. I say luckily because if they had done no planning and paid dividend rates, then we'd been 40%. So when you don't have things like BPR available to you on these assets, you pay massive amounts of inheritance tax plus some other tax, because you've got to realise investments to pay the inheritance tax. So it's a double whammy. And now we've got potentially trading businesses who might be doing very well. Owner dies, we've still got a significant IHT bill because we've now got BPR. I know it's an effective 20% rate because you've got your 50% relief, but it's still something they're going to have to fund.
Yeah, and it's how do they pay for that?
Fund it?
Because
Inheritance tax is always, it's a tax on income that has already been taxed. Essentially, whatever your company's worth, you've already paid corporation tax on those profits. So inheritance tax is already a tax on taxed income. So to then have to sell assets and pay capital gains tax to pay the inheritance tax that you're paying on profits that have already been taxed, it's almost like, what are you left with? When you actually work it through and you get to the end, what sort of percentage are you left with? Because I don't think it's a lot.
And it's not just businesses as well. Well, look after a number of farmers, and I think this will be the first time in a long time where we are breaking up the family farm.
Well, I actually think you'll impact the farming trade, because it's not hugely profitable. No one farms because it's massively profitable. They farm because they love it. And the added bonus is the fact that they've always had this inheritance tax exemption. And you think, actually, if there's a family farm and they get an offer for a development of housing, they're going to do it. And then we question how much food, slightly off topic, is imported from outside the country, and why don't we grow this? And what you're going to do is you're actually going to just annihilate the farming trade, I would imagine, to a certain
I
degree.
thought that was a very interesting change. I thought, that if you're going to protect one particular group of people, that would be one of the ones
Yeah,
to
you
protect.
want your UK farmers, don't you? Yeah.
But I think
Surprising.
coming back to my example of the client we've just dealt with, they had to sell properties to do it. What does a trading business do? You're affecting their trade, so you're therefore affecting employment. How do you raise the money?
There's no easy way to liquidate your shares.
No.
So there are options available in terms of you can get funding on the business, but if the business has already got a significant degree of funding, and leveraging it, it'd probably be harder to raise too much more, I guess.
Yeah. This is what really concerns me about this IHT change, because I just think it's ridiculous. I love Ian's comment: live 5 years and vote Tories back in. That's one way of solving the problem. Thanks, Ian. Let me just pick up on some of the comments, because we've had a few on IHT, understandably. I'll work backwards. Andrew, we're talking, DPR, we mean BPR, business property relief.
Yeah, business property relief. So it used to be called business property relief, now called business relief, just to confuse everyone. Essentially, a trading business, and typically you would get 100% exemption from inheritance tax. So it wouldn't apply to a property company, could apply to property development, but certainly not a property investment company.
Yeah, so that's business property relief. Do the changes in IHT come in April or immediately?
A bit of a mix. So pensions are coming into the estate from April 2027.
Yep.
We were worried that we were going to see, there's been rumours about the 25% tax-free allowance being abolished. So it's quite good that that hasn't gone. It perhaps gives people that are nearing that point the opportunity to get that out at least. But even then, you've got to spend it. Otherwise, it's still in your estate anyway, but at least you could have fun with it. So that's from April 2027. The business relief and agricultural property relief changes are from April 2026. So a bit of a mix there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug. If your pension pot is in a SIP, sorry, my cough's still lingering. If it's in a SIP, is this excluded from being included in your IHT calculation?
I'll take this one. No, a SIP is effectively just a self-invested personal pension. There were some original queries about what Rachel Reeves meant when she said inherited pensions. We've looked through the policy paper now that's just come out. Page 118, if you wanted to be specific, section 29.
I mean, it was terrible wording by her.
Oh, yeah, awful.
Yeah.
Our forum and community literally couldn't make head to toe of what she was saying, and she delivered it in one line. But to keep it brief, the exact wording is include unused pension funds and death benefits payable from a pension in the value of estates from the 6th of April 2027. So initially, what we expect will happen is, if you were to pass away, then whereas the solicitor wouldn't necessarily need a value of your pension for completing your estate return, now that will be included for the purposes of your estate. The spousal exemption, I assume, will still apply.
It would still apply,
yeah.
I double checked that, yeah. So it's only on the second death that you've got an issue.
So it would only be on the second death, then on the inheritors' estate, that the inheritance tax would be payable. So yes.
Okay. And one last one on this topic: is there now IHT on EIS shares above 1 million? I think the answer is yes.
Yes, yeah. There's never been
BPR,
any special exemption, particularly. So yes, above 1 million.
Yeah, and I think there's a few other things that haven't been confirmed here. Also, with group life schemes, you can either set them up on an accepted or a registered group life basis. One falls under pensions legislation, one falls under insurance legislation. So there's now the question to say, if it's set up under pensions legislation, could that group death in service payout now be considered as part of your IHT? So this is where we need to get the detail.
I mean, we've certainly had a lot of clients over the years. Obviously, hindsight is a wonderful thing, where we have done a lot of planning and gone to a lot of lengths to get properties or trading premises into pension schemes specifically for this reason. So for them, it must be really disappointing for that to just reverse in that way. One thing we were worried about was the probate, the CGT uplift.
Yes.
So even if there's no IHT, everything still gets rebased for capital gains tax purposes. That hasn't gone, which I'm most surprised about.
I would just say, although obviously the removal, bringing the pension into the estate for inheritance tax purposes doesn't sound great. The pension is still a valuable tax wrapper. There's obviously no CGT. 25% is available free of income tax. And if you're holding a commercial property in a business compared to, say, personally, then you can necessarily control when that rent is effectively withdrawn and not paying income tax. So there's still definite benefits.
During life, it's still a
during
massive
life.
beneficial thing, isn't it? I said last question, but we've actually had a few more questions come in, so we'll go through them. Are the pension changes in 27? Does this mean only pension contributions made after that date are subject to IHT, or your entire pot?
I believe it's your entire pot, but Jamie can confirm.
Yeah, well, this is why this isn't a change that's happened overnight, because ultimately pensions fall under trust legislation. There'll have to be a bill. It have to be discussed in Parliament. So whether we actually see it happen, who knows?
It's awfully complex legislation. That's the problem, isn't it?
And it goes back, years and years. So it's not something that can be done. So just coming off that question, something that we haven't mentioned and that are located in here, for the purposes of income tax, they're no longer trying to move to the household income calculation for the purposes of child benefit.
Yeah.
So this is the reason I stated that, is because this is what happens when changes aren't enacted overnight, like CGT has. Ultimately, there will be a period of consultation and things can still change.
Yeah.
I suppose the only downside of this is the start of the government, so they've got more time.
One way or another,
One way
it'll
or
come in,
another,
won't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. David, would it be better to withdraw 25% pension allowance and gift it to children and hope I survive long enough to avoid IHT? Going back to Jamie again.
This is not advice, but it is completely dependent upon personal circumstances, and it depends exactly what your objectives are. But if pensions are brought into the realms of IHT, then obviously there may be a reason to conduct more trust-based planning outside of pensions.
I was about to say that the danger you've got is if your pension pot is huge, let's say your pension pot's 2 million and you take out 500,000, to gift that to one of your children, obviously it completely depends family to family, but if they get into matrimonial difficulties or get made bankrupt, all of a sudden they're worth 500,000, you've got no control over that. So what we tend to recommend is, if you are in that position and you want to make a substantial gift, use a trust. You can buy assets in the trust, you can buy investments, but some people just set up a trust and use it as a loaning mechanism. So the trust will loan the money to the child. And then if they do get into difficulties, them as trustees can call it back. So yes, you could do that and survive the 7 years, but I would always recommend just having a little think. Everyone thinks the worst won't happen. And I realise it might be a really negative viewpoint, but nothing would surprise me. We've seen it all. And I would just recommend using some sort of trust as a protective wrapper. I think if it's a substantial sum, it would be worth it.
And I think just to add to that, there's a lot of complexity around trust. There's lots of different types of arrangements. Some will allow you to retain control. Some will allow you to retain control and income. Some will allow you to, control gifting. So this is where you need to seek professional advice, and it's not a one size fits all solution for these complex areas.
No, I think that's the problem with this. Like we can answer generally, can't we? But in reality, everybody's going to be different in these. Excuse me again. Roger, is it now possible that you will be charged IHT on the pension fund and then have the residue taxed as income in the hands of the beneficiary?
I think, if we look back at the position prior to 2016, before George Osborne introduced pension freedoms, ultimately you would expect that if inheritance tax has been paid and then it's left to somebody and then it's passed through a beneficiary drawdown or successor drawdown wrapper, you would hope that then they can withdraw the funds free of income tax. Otherwise you are getting, the 40% inheritance tax and then the income tax. And again, this is why I think they've said this would be introduced in 2027, because it is so complex that nobody knows the answer. But that is ultimately what we're not scared of, but we're very conscious of. You can't be, paying inheritance tax and then income tax. That doesn't necessarily seem fair. So let's just await the detail.
Yeah. And one final one, where a pension is written in trust, which applies when you die, does that sum become subject to IHT?
This is where spousal bypass trust for pensions may be brought more into the planning space. It's something that is done, not necessarily conventionally, but it can work well for individuals. Ultimately, again, I wish I knew the answer, but we don't. We've got Rachel Reeves, what she said to go by, and we've got just a short paragraph here, but I am on a number of technical webinars and calls over the next coming days with policy writers in the pension space. And so if anybody has any specific queries, get in touch and then I can feed your questions to them and we can obviously take it from there.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was IHT, clearly an interesting one for me, for everybody watching. But let's move on. Let's talk about capital gains and yet another hit for business owners. Crikey. Okay, what have we got on?
Where do you start?
I'm getting tired of the business owners being attacked now.
We thought business asset disposal relief was going to go in the last week or two. I've perhaps changed my opinion on that and thought maybe it wasn't going to go, but I'm pleasantly surprised to see it's still there, even though the rates are going up. I think it's still a benefit to someone for a trading company.
Yes. So to tie that into, they're also increasing CGT rates. So they're going from 10% for basic rate, 20% for higher rate, now going to be 18 and 24%.
And that is from midnight last night. There was a lot of confusion. I am 99% certain that she said that was from the 5th of April. on the
definitely not in the papers.
On the
it's
live
definitely
forecast.
from now.
In the papers, it is from midnight last night. So it's anything that completes on or after today's date. So that could impact people. The one thing that surprised me is residential properties there's always been a higher rate. So that's 24%. I'm really surprised that hasn't gone up. Because to me, that is the people, they're always talking about people with additional properties or second homes, or certainly the stamp duty changes have reflected that. So I'm really surprised that the residential CGT rate hasn't gone up. So that's still 24%. So if you're a higher rate taxpayer, and it doesn't matter whether you're selling shares or a residential property, really, you're in that 24% tax bracket, which just seems odd to me.
So that's what they've done with CGT generally. We then have BADR. We've still got BADR. We've got £1 million lifetime allowance still. However, what have we got? A 14% from April and then 18% from April 26th. So gradually increasing to align with the new basic rate of CGT. As I say, another hit for business owners, really.
It is, although I know certainly we've been speaking to lots of business owners recently who are in the process of selling or close to finalising and haven't quite got there for the budget. So I'm glad that they've got until the 5th of April. I think there'll be a lot of business owners that potentially take advantage of that now. But the fact that it's going up isn't particularly helpful, but we thought it'd be gone altogether. So
in a sense, a small
you've got to be grateful.
I think, we knew CGT was going to increase, but this is why if you are a business owner, it is very important to make use of, your tax allowances, make use of your annual ISA allowance, make use of your ability to still extract profit from your company into pensions. There's no employer national insurance, which was what was highly touted. And we knew that the Treasury was speaking to the platforms because ultimately, if anything were to happen to your business or when you realise that business value, you will still need to derive a tax efficient income. And the only way to do that is if you've been making use of your various allowances over the years. So pensions and ISAs, there's no capital gains tax on any growth. Whereas, if you withdrew your tax-free lump sum from your pension and then were to invest it to provide an income outside of an ISA, you are going to have to pay capital gains tax as you realise the use that.
Pete commented, I'm intrigued by the increase in benefit of BADR. And what he means there is, at the moment, BADR is effectively worth £100,000 because otherwise you'd be paying 20% if you didn't have your 10% flat rate on your first million.
Now you've got 14%.
Now you've got a 14% gap. So it's actually, until April, it's worth 140,000. So again, I had a client message me this morning saying, was it worth all of the effort to get their deal over the line by last night, because it was one hell of an effort, and we had to kind of concede on a few points on the due diligence. And the answer was yes, because they only had about 600k left of their BADR and the rest was subject to 20%. Had they waited until today, they'd be paying 24%. So that actually was a benefit and worth them doing it.
And I can't imagine if you were that close watching the budget and just holding your breath and hoping for the best, to be honest. I'm not sure my heart could take it. So I would have thought it would be worth completing just for that little bit of certainty, unless they're really risky.
So those transactions that we've been working day and night to get done, especially me and Chaz, I'm looking at Chaz right now.
Well, there were a few that we got done.
You both do look a little older today.
I was going to say the bags under my eyes. Jeez.
But I think there were about 3 in our team that we got done last night, and they were definitely.
You had one at 11:58, or
I was mentioning my colleagues. Mine were a bit more respectable times. Than 1.5.
I had a client email me and say I did complete at 11:58 p.m. And I thought, gosh, that was really cutting it fine. But...
So yes, those people have their time well spent, and they've actually got some benefit. But I do think over the next 5 months until the new rules come in for BADR, the 14%, we're probably going to see people trying to push their deals through by then again, aren't we?
Absolutely. I guess we've got a few clients that are, kind of potentially got deals in the pipeline. Is maybe just might be willing just to kind of, take a bit of view on maybe some of the terms, because actually the BADR relief is quite attractive for the next 5 months. As you just pointed out, it's actually worth more than it perhaps was worth before. Even though in real terms they're still getting taxed at the same amount. But it certainly helped in terms of, I guess, from a deal making perspective, and kind of ensuring that those deals are still going to happen. I guess the fear we had before the budget was the unknown, and that's why we've done so many deals before today. But I mean, kind of, it's obviously not great that, I guess most of our clients are probably paying an extra 4%, and maybe up to 8% more when, the full impact of BADR comes in, in a couple of years' time. But I do like the way that it's staggered. And it's not a kind of a cliff, not complete cliff edge increase. And it's not so much of an increase that I think, is going to, put off deal making and people wanting to sell.
30% and no BADR, and you think a lot of people would at that point think, well, I'm not walking away with enough.
You always have a conversation with the owners kind of go, well, actually, if I'm selling to this business, I could just stay there and work for another 4 or 5 years, and I could earn that amount and then sell it again. I mean, obviously we always have the conversation in terms of, well, that doesn't help, your path to retirement necessarily, but I, do see the point. But kind of with the talk of, CGT rates starting to maybe potentially aligning with income tax rates, it was kind of, is there any point in selling your company at all? Discussions becoming more prevalent. So, so I'm, I guess, from my perspective, quite pleased with the budget, even though it's, I guess, not necessarily a positive from a tax point of view, but it's not as bad.
It could have been worse.
Definitely. No, excuse me. I genuinely think it could have been, because I was expecting a lot worse, and I kind of thought, okay, I know there's some significant changes here, but at the same time, we could have had worse from the predictions that were being made. So.
Yeah, I think though the pensions change shouldn't be understated. That will bring 8% more of the population into bring them into inheritance tax territory. Obviously it's an intergenerational tax, and it's absolutely massive to to most people. So
I'm a little bit conscious of time because there's still a few taxes to cover. Let me go to one question, and then I want to mention EOTs briefly. David, one of my businesses is closing next year. There's not a massive amount, but it is 6 figures. Should I bring this date forward and close it earlier than next April, which was what we have planned? I think the answer is certainly if you're getting BADR, there's a benefit to doing it. Obviously, you need to be comfortable that you do get BADR, because otherwise there isn't a benefit.
You just want to get that checked out. But if you do, and a lot of the time what you actually see is more than one person getting BADR as well. So if you've got a shareholding and you've given half that shareholding to your spouse, and you've planned it all correctly and taken advice, then there's a good chance that there's more than one BADR in there. So you think that difference between, the 5th of April and the 10th of April could be absolutely huge in terms of capital gains. So yes, I would certainly speak to someone and have
I was going to say, you kind of need to look at the
what that
specific
looks like.
circumstances.
So
but
what
yes.
does it look like now, and what would it look like post-April? And then make your decision from there. Like Chaz said, that might mean you perhaps being more flexible on certain things or giving into certain things. But if the benefit to you is that much, then at least you've got that information, you know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess with all these things, I always say kind of you should always be led by the main commercial rationale for
exactly.
when you want to shut down the business. So if kind of, you know, the tax is one thing, it's one part of a larger equation, really. So,
if it's closing anyway, then quite possibly yes, but look at the
Let
circumstance.
what is the old
I was thinking, I couldn't remember it, so I wasn't going to say it.
tail wag the dog.
That's the one.
That's it,
It's very true.
Okay, so EOTs. She didn't mention EOTs in the speech, but we have finally got changes. I do loads on EOTs, which is why I'm so talking passionately finally. So the point with EOTs, this is where you can sell a trading business to a trust for the benefit of all employees. Much more popular than they were. They came out in 2014, and they're becoming more and more popular, more and more people understanding what they are and the benefits, because there are some major benefits. But no changes have been made since 2014 until today. So what changes have we got? As I say, EOTs are massive because you can sell without a cap. So we haven't got £1 million or £10 million cap. We've got no cap. We've sold 106 million into an EOT with no CGT at all. And so, you know, lots of people are pursuing this as a potential succession plan. As I say, no changes so far until now, which are, we've got trustee independence. So it used to be that you could sell to the trust and basically still just be the trustee controlling the company and nothing really changes. And it's a bit like, well, are you doing this for tax planning or are you doing this genuinely for employee ownership? So to me, sort of in terms of actually being passionate about employee ownership, that's a big positive change in the right direction. It's going to be used less for tax planning, more to genuinely benefit employees. The consideration requirement, ensuring the sales price don't exceed market value, because we have had people try and push the boat a little bit by saying, okay, well, Chaz valued it at 5 million, but I want to sell for 10. We're like, well, technically the trustees have a legal obligation not to overpay, but there's nothing else in the tax legislation.
I mean, it's interesting I mean, obviously, kind of just released what the rules about how they want to police it. I mean, sorry, the rules, but actually, I think the interesting bit would be actually how they police that or monitor that, because these things are done based upon a valuation, which is a hypothetical exercise. You don't know a market value of a company until you take it to market and find a buyer who's willing to pay a certain price for it. And by the time you've done all that effort, then you might as well sell it. So
well, I think what this legislation is now doing is basically saying you need to take reasonable efforts to establish market value. So getting a corporate finance expert to value the company, which we do. I think all of our EOTs have had an independent valuation, so probably would have met that requirement regardless. So that's that. A couple of other, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. A couple of other points. It used to be that when the vendor sells, you have to keep maintaining those conditions until the end of the following tax year, and then it becomes the trust problem if there's a clawback of relief. Now it's 4 years, so that's quite a long time. Puts more onus on the seller to make sure. Again, I think it puts onus on the seller to make sure this is genuine employee ownership and you're not going to fall out of it. Any other really big ones to mention? Oh, and there's one less clearance for us to have to do, because now we have an official relief for paying money up to the trust to pay out the consideration. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the changes of employee ownership trust, but very welcome for us. Oh, Dan,
they are getting really popular now.
Massively popular, and I mean for good reason. As long as you see the benefits, and
especially
as long
now
as
the CGC is going up as well.
Exactly.
Actually, that's even
I think
more
we'll see
of an
more.
incentive.
Yeah. And sorry, Dan, you did just mention one I had forgotten off that list: no overseas trustees. So that was another way you could abuse the tax system by saying, "I'll sell to the EOT, which will be offshore, and offshore trust doesn't pay tax. So when the offshore trust sells, it pays no tax." And I've had a tax-free sale in, and I mean, we've never actually done one with an offshore trust, but I know of some. So it's nice that I think, again, that's closing that loophole. So thanks, Dan, for pointing that one SDLT, we have a few changes, fairly significant if this applies to you. So second home additional rate increasing. It used to be if you're buying a second home, you pay an extra 3%. Now you pay an extra 5%. And that applies from, I've written here the 31st of October, so tomorrow.
I mean, devastating if you're about to complete
Yeah,
on a property
God.
and you're just, because I mean, that doesn't give you time to withdraw or time to, it doesn't give you time to do anything. It almost would have been nicer to have done it from last night, because then you just think, oh, well,
It's done
over
now.
and done with. But, you know, I dread to think what solicitors and property conveyancers have had in the way of phone calls today. People trying to get that over the line.
Pete's just said it's cost him another £7,000.
Yeah, exactly. So I should imagine, and I know we all say, oh, you know, if you've got a second home and landlords, and yes, it's a fortunate position to be in. However, that is still a chunky old cost. There was talk of them changing the stamp duty land tax threshold. So it used to be 125,000. You paid no stamp duty. Then it went up to 250. There was talk of that coming down. And that's just been completely ignored, which is good, I think, because I think the average house price is a hell of a lot bigger. But yeah, that additional 2%, and that, of course, that applies to companies as well. Companies are automatically treated as if they're in the higher rate. So any companies that are buying properties that are property traders, they'll have that additional 2% cost again. So again, small businesses, if that's your sector, that could really impact you.
Yeah, it is a strange one. Other than really just trying to put the hammer down on landlords, you're now probably it's for the benefit of trying to get first-time buyers and main homeowners coming into the property market.
Yeah,
you're now going to reduce the number of rental properties available, so rents will go up. I don't think it'll do anything particular in terms of property values, because we've still got the same problem: undersupply, over demand. So I don't think we'll see any movement there in any particular reason. So what exactly are they trying to gain? I also don't think there's a huge number of new landlords coming into the market with all the difficulties that they have in operating the sector at the moment anyway.
I mean, landlords have been hammered year after year, I must admit. You know, all the changes to income tax, interest rates going up, all the changes that happened in COVID in terms of how easy it is to get a tenant out of your property if you want them to leave. I do think they've been hammered. So if I was a landlord, I think this would be the point where I'd be thinking enough's enough. I'm out. But.
So that's an interesting one. The other SDLT change we've seen for more valuable homes over 600,000, unless you meet one of the exemptions or reliefs, it's a 15% flat rate, which was already high, and now they've increased it to 17%.
Yeah, which is a crazy
rate of SDLT.
I'd love to know how they've calculated it, because that is just
it's huge,
insane amount.
I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of reliefs or exemptions that could apply. So if you're renting out a property to a third party where it's worth more than 500, then you don't pay this rate. And numerous others. But
I think it's more if you're living in it. It's essentially who they're targeting. They're targeting you from owning your main home in a corporate body. I think that was always the intention of it. But even so, you just think that seems huge.
I wonder what impact that will have, because I know, Paul, you said there's not much impact probably on things like house prices, but I think, you know, this was largely brought in for things like changes in, you know, for foreigners buying in London and really expensive houses in corporate bodies. So we're going to have much change to this. I mean, if you've got that much money anyway, do you really care about another 2%?
Well, that's possibly the big key thing. Is it really going to change people's behaviours? You know, there is an argument to say that one big house worth millions in the country could be split down to a much wider scheme if possible. And I think that's probably where we need to see more activity. We're seeing a lot more small developments coming through, which for probably around the more sensible mid-market value. And, you know, that's where there's availability of funding and there's sort of opportunities to try and work planning more at that level.
But actually 500,000 isn't a huge house anymore. So actually, you know, I say a lot of this is targeting the really valuable houses in places like London where they are millions, whereas, you know, 500,000 is a mediocre family house in some places, isn't it? So,
exactly.
Having said that, if you're living in it personally, why are you buying it in a corporate body for things like PPR and principal private residence relief? So
it is just a very strange one to me. And your point about it not being your average house, first time buyer stamp duty relief, I think that's 450,000. They say first time. But yet the inheritance tax threshold is 325. And you think the two so you can have all these first time buyers, as soon as they buy a home, you'll say that, you know, potentially they're in inheritance tax bracket straight away. They just don't seem to balance.
No. So yeah, a couple of changes on SDLT, and we'll see whether that really has any impact, and if Paul's prediction is correct. No, it won't. I was going to move on to pensions, but I think we've pretty much covered most of what we were going to say about pensions. One big thing is we talked about when we had a pre-budget podcast, we were expecting employers' NIC on contributions. So that's very welcome. I think that that didn't come into play, but otherwise, I think we've covered most of the other points, especially the IHT.
I don't think they could have done that along with the other changes.
No,
that would have been brutal.
If you think for a small business, then you've got minimum wage, I just think that would have been too much.
Yeah, what they've done is actually quite clever, because they've tried to carve out a policy which wouldn't affect the public sector, and where people in the public sector have final salary pension schemes which don't necessarily have a value but provide an income. Obviously, they won't be tested for inheritance tax purposes compared to an individual with a personal pension, where that fund will now be tested. So I think it's a clever way of getting around the eventual carve out that would have.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
I'll just come on to a question from Edward. As a director of an SME, I didn't see any changes to dividend tax rates. Did I miss anything? No, you didn't.
There was no changes, which is lovely. So all the thresholds are frozen, which isn't great. I'm surprised the dividend allowance hasn't gone. And I'm surprised that them rates haven't gone up, but no changes.
Otherwise, no changes. So I guess we can say one positive thing for business.
Well, yes.
Just before we round it, a couple of very brief comments. Non-DOMs abolished.
Non-DOMs is abolished. Still waiting to see the detail about what the new scheme is going to look like. I know it's going to tie in quite nicely with what lots of European countries do. Portugal has done it for years, where they say, right, you can come to us and actually we won't tax your foreign income for the first however long you've been here. I think they're suggesting 4 years, but it's very much draft at the moment. With the aim of people bringing their wealth to the UK. So previously you've had non-DOMs coming here and keeping all their wealth overseas because they don't want to be taxed on it. So it's kind of a reversal on that. And what they're trying to do is encourage wealthy to come to the UK. Whether it works or not, who knows? But I think it will probably be quite a welcome change. Explaining the non-domicile regime to people is extremely difficult because it's so complicated and it doesn't really make much sense to anyone. So you end up, you've got certain experts around the UK, and the reason they're experts is because there's very few people who actually fully grasp what it is because it's so complex. So I think a simplified system that encourages a bit of wealth, I think that will be welcome, but we haven't seen much in the way of detail.
And a very brief comment on carried interest. They're increasing CGT rates to 32% from April 25, and then income tax rules apply from April 26. So probably not, going to affect most of our clients.
No, probably not. Probably not one that affects, most of, our client base. Probably more one that affects, private equity and other asset management, people. I think it was an area that before the budget they said they were going to attack, bring in line with income tax rates. It looks like they've settled on the halfway house, so they're going to increase CG to 32%.
32%
CGT from April 25, and then make it some sort of income tax thereafter, but probably roughly around the 30% mark of.
And I think that pretty much brings us to an end. I don't want to end on a negative note, but to round it up, I think it's a horrible budget for business owners. Absolutely horrible.
But I think the build up to it and the anticipation
it could have been
hasn't been pleasant. I for one, I'm glad it's over.
I think, business owners not great. You've got the minimum wage and living wage. You've got BADR, increasing CGT. IHT, I think, is catastrophic for some business
It is, yeah.
owners.
Yep.
However, as you say, it could be worse. EOTs, I think they've put some welcome changes into that. So maybe we'll see more succession planning, and we'll be looking more at employee ownership, which for those who are passionate about that will think that's a fantastic idea. So happy days. Has anyone else got any sort of main takeaways that they want to?
Yeah, I suppose I think overall it seems kind of the budget's been well received. I mean, I guess obviously kind of just say
Other than me about the business owners.
Other than I guess tax on business owners stuff, but I guess in terms of the spending and the focus on the long-term objectives, I think that's been well received by markets and what have you. And certainly the cost of the government borrowing has gone down since they've announced the budget.
Yeah.
They obviously have changed the rules so they can borrow a bit more to invest, but whilst that may not yield growth in the short term, it's good to know that there's some long-term investment going on, because I think actually if you look back at the history of the for the last few decades or a couple of decades or so, there probably hasn't been that level of long-term investment that we need, and I guess we all see it around the country in terms of lack of potholes in the roads and all that. And kind of rail infrastructure, which isn't necessarily fit for purpose. And I suppose these sort of expenditures do need to be made and are good for business in the long term and UK PLC. So despite, I guess, the negatives on the tax for business owners, I think there is a kind of an overarching, I think, kind of positivity to what they're trying to do, and kind of obviously no particular allegiances, but obviously. I hope it works, because it benefit us all.
Yeah, but something needs to change, doesn't it? Definitely. So
certainly, you're on about the investments, very welcome, which it is. There's a slight drag in terms of inflation, because obviously it'll drive the economy forward. Inflation's forecast about 2.5%, I think, for the next 24 months. So there's an argument to say the Bank of England, perhaps if it can't reduce rates because of inflation, perhaps it just needs to get behind economy growth, the growth of the economy, and see if it can, kickstart the economy towards. They were talking about 1.1% GDP this year, pushing to 2%. If the Bank of England moves quickly, that could potentially get it moving forward a lot quicker.
Okay, well, you guys are much more positive than me, so we'll end it there on a positive note. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining us. There will be a budget summary being released, so check out our budget hub for that. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you on the next one very soon. If you do have any questions, details are all on there. We're all very happy to have a chat, email us, all of those types of things. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.